The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor of Sterling Financial Tower, and Marcus Blackwood stepped into his domain. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the scent of fresh orchids filled the air. At 62, Marcus commanded one of Wall Street's most powerful investment firms. But today, something felt different. Today, his perfectly ordered world was about to collide with a force he never saw coming. Marcus had built his empire on cold calculation and ruthless precision. Every decision measured in profit margins, every relationship evaluated for strategic value. His penthouse office overlooked Manhattan like a fortress, insulated from the chaos below. But empires built on ice have a dangerous tendency to crack when exposed to unexpected warmth. The phone buzzed on his mahogany desk. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Blackwood, the Nanny agency is here for the interview." Marcus barely looked up from his financial reports. His daughter Emma needed supervision while staying at his estate for the summer, and hiring domestic staff was just another transaction to him. He expected this to take 15 minutes at most. What Marcus didn't expect was Sophie Chen. She walked into his office with quiet confidence. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest blue dress that somehow made her seem both professional and approachable. While other candidates had stumbled over themselves trying to impress him with credentials and references, Sophie met his gaze directly, unflinching under the intensity that had intimidated Fortune 500 executives. "Tell me about yourself," Marcus said, his tone sharp and businesslike, designed to establish dominance from the first moment. Sophie smiled slightly, as if she could see right through his intimidation tactics. "I'm 28 years old, and I've been working with children for 6 years. I have a degree in child psychology from Columbia, but more importantly, I believe every child deserves to feel heard and valued, regardless of their circumstances." Something in her voice made Marcus pause. Not the rehearsed politeness he was used to hearing, but genuine warmth. He found himself studying her face, noting the way her eyes lit up when she talked about working with children, the subtle strength in her posture that suggested she wouldn't be easily pushed around. "My daughter can be difficult," Marcus warned, testing her resolve. "She's been through 4 nannies in the past year. The last one quit after Emma locked her in the garden shed." Sophie laughed, a musical sound that seemed to brighten the entire room. "Sounds like Emma's testing boundaries. Children often act out when they're trying to communicate something they can't put into words. What happened before the first nanny left?" The question caught Marcus off guard. No one had ever asked what happened before, only how to manage Emma's behavior moving forward. "Her mother left us 2 years ago. Emma hasn't been the same since." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Abandonment trauma manifests differently in every child. Emma's probably protecting herself by pushing people away before they can leave her. She needs consistency and patience, not another adult who'll disappear when things get challenging." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. This young woman, barely older than his daughter, was speaking about Emma with more insight than the expensive child psychologists he'd hired. She wasn't seeing Emma as a problem to be managed, but as a hurting little girl who needed understanding. "The position requires living at my estate in the Hamptons for the summer," Marcus continued, trying to regain his professional composure. "You'd have your own wing, complete privacy, and access to all amenities. The salary is substantial." Sophie tilted her head slightly. "What does Emma like to do? What makes her happy?" Again, Marcus found himself stumped by her priorities. Other candidates had focused on schedules and responsibilities. Sophie wanted to know about his daughter's joy. "She used to paint. Before everything happened, she would spend hours in the art room creating these amazing landscapes. Now she won't even touch a brush." "Art therapy can be incredibly healing," Sophie said softly. "Sometimes children can express through color and form what they can't say with words. Would you mind if I tried some creative approaches with her?" Marcus studied this remarkable young woman sitting across from his desk. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or status. She hadn't asked about vacation time or benefits. Her entire focus remained on how to help Emma heal. Something about Sophie's genuine care stirred memories he'd buried deep, of what it felt like to believe in goodness and hope before Wall Street had hardened his heart into stone. "When can you start?" The words left his mouth before he'd consciously decided to hire her. Sophie's smile could have powered the entire city. "Tomorrow, if Emma's ready to meet me." That night, Marcus found himself thinking about Sophie's questions long after she'd left his office. When was the last time he'd asked Emma what made her happy? When had he stopped seeing his daughter as a person with feelings and dreams, and started viewing her as another responsibility to be managed? The drive to his Hampton estate the next morning felt different somehow. Instead of reviewing merger documents, Marcus caught himself wondering what Sophie would think of the sprawling gardens, the infinity pool overlooking the ocean, the art studio he'd built for Emma that now sat empty and unused. Sophie arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, carrying a small suitcase and a canvas bag that seemed to bulge with mysterious supplies. She stood at the front entrance of the estate, not gawking at the grandeur like most visitors, but looking thoughtful, as if she was imagining how a child might experience this vast space. "It's beautiful," she said when Marcus greeted her, "but it must feel quite large for a 10-year-old girl who's missing her mother." Once again, Sophie had seen what he'd missed entirely. The estate that represented his success suddenly looked through her eyes like an elegant prison, too big and too empty for a lonely child. Emma appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. She'd clearly prepared for battle, expecting another nanny to try winning her over with false enthusiasm and empty promises. Sophie looked up at Emma and did something extraordinary. She sat down on the marble floor, cross-legged like a kindergarten student, and waited. No forced smiles, no patronizing baby talk, just patient presence. "I'm Sophie," she said simply. "I heard you're an artist." Emma's defensive posture wavered slightly. "I don't paint anymore." "That's okay. Sometimes we need breaks from things that used to bring us joy. But I brought some supplies anyway, just in case you ever feel like creating something. No pressure." Marcus watched this interaction with growing amazement. In 30 seconds, Sophie had accomplished what months of expensive therapy hadn't. She'd acknowledged Emma's pain without trying to fix it, offered hope without demanding trust. "What kind of supplies?" Emma asked, curiosity winning over caution. Sophie opened her canvas bag and pulled out jars of sand in different colors, smooth river stones, and bottles of what looked like liquid starlight. "These are for making memory bottles. You fill them with beautiful things that remind you of moments you want to keep forever." For the first time in 2 years, Marcus saw genuine interest flicker in his daughter's eyes. Emma descended the stairs slowly, drawn by the magical supplies spread across the floor. As Marcus watched Sophie and Emma begin creating something beautiful together, he realized his carefully controlled world was about to change in ways he couldn't predict or manage. This young nanny was going to transform more than just his daughter's summer. She was about to transform everything. That first week at the estate passed like a dream Marcus didn't want to wake from. Every morning he found excuses to linger before leaving for the city, watching through his study window as Sophie and Emma explored the grounds together. The young nanny had a gift for turning ordinary moments into adventures. A simple walk became a treasure hunt for the perfect seashells. Breakfast transformed into a science experiment with pancakes shaped like molecular structures. Emma began laughing again. The sound drifted through the halls like music Marcus had forgotten existed. His daughter started sleeping through the night, no longer crying out for a mother who would never return. But perhaps most remarkable of all, Emma picked up a paintbrush for the first time in 2 years. Marcus discovered this one evening when he returned home earlier than usual. Following the sound of gentle voices, he found Sophie and Emma in the art studio, both covered in splashes of blue and gold paint. Emma was creating a sunset over the ocean, her small hands moving with confidence he hadn't seen since before the divorce. "Daddy, look what I made," Emma called out, her face glowing with pride. "Sophie taught me how to blend colors to make the sky look like it's breathing." Marcus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. He couldn't remember the last time Emma had called him Daddy with such joy, or shown him her artwork with genuine excitement rather than obligation. "It's magnificent, sweetheart," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "Absolutely magnificent." Sophie caught his eye over Emma's head, and for a moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with employer and employee. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of something deeper stirring beneath the surface of their professional arrangement. As weeks melted into each other, Marcus found himself staying at the estate longer each day. Conference calls that could have kept him in the city until midnight suddenly seemed less urgent than family dinners where Emma chattered about her adventures with Sophie. Board meetings that once commanded his complete attention now competed with thoughts of Sophie's laugh echoing through the halls. He began to notice small details about her that had nothing to do with her work with Emma. The way she hummed while preparing breakfast, always the same melody he couldn't quite identify. How she read voraciously, leaving books scattered throughout the house like breadcrumbs marking her journey through different worlds. The gentle way she spoke to the gardener about his arthritis, or how she remembered the housekeeper's daughter was starting college in the fall. Sophie treated everyone with the same genuine respect, regardless of their position or wealth. She was kind without being naive, strong without being harsh. In a world where Marcus had learned to trust no one completely, Sophie radiated authenticity that both attracted and terrified him. One evening, Marcus found Sophie alone on the terrace, sketching the moonlight dancing across the water. Emma had fallen asleep during their nightly story, and the house felt peaceful in a way it never had before Sophie's arrival. "You don't have to work every moment," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her. "You're allowed to rest." Sophie smiled without looking up from her drawing. "This doesn't feel like work. Emma's an incredible kid. She just needed someone to see her gifts instead of focusing on her grief." "You've given her something I couldn't," Marcus admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "You've given her hope." "You give her more than you realize," Sophie replied, finally meeting his gaze. "She talks about you constantly. How proud she is that you build things that help people. How she wants to be strong like her daddy someday. She loves you desperately, Marcus. She just didn't know how to show it when she was hurting so much." The way Sophie said his name sent warmth spreading through his chest. Not Mr. Blackwood with professional distance, but Marcus with intimate familiarity, as if she'd been saying it her whole life. "I should have seen what she needed," Marcus said quietly. "I should have been enough." Sophie set down her sketchbook and turned to face him fully. "Grief makes us all feel insufficient. You were doing the best you could with the tools you had. The important thing is recognizing when you need help and being brave enough to accept it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching waves crash against the shore below. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this settled, this present in a single moment, without his mind racing toward the next deal or crisis demanding his attention. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie's voice was soft in the darkness. Marcus nodded, though he suspected any question from Sophie might crack open parts of himself he'd kept carefully sealed. "What made you want to build an empire? Before the money and power became their own motivation, what drove you to create something so massive?" The question pierced deeper than Marcus expected. Most people assumed he'd always been motivated by greed or status. Sophie was asking about the man he'd been before Wall Street had shaped him into someone he barely recognized anymore. "I wanted to matter," Marcus said finally. "I grew up poor, watching my father work 3 jobs and still struggle to pay rent. I swore I'd build something so solid, so successful, that no one I loved would ever feel that kind of fear again." "And did it work?" Sophie asked gently. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "I built the empire, accumulated more wealth than my father could have imagined. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was building it. Success became an addiction rather than a means to an end. I was so focused on providing financial security that I forgot to provide emotional security. When Emma's mother left, she told me I'd become a stranger to my own family." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing his confession. "It's not too late to remember," she said eventually. "Emma still needs her father. Not the Wall Street titan, but the man who wanted to protect the people he loves." Something cracked open in Marcus's chest, releasing years of carefully contained longing. He'd been so focused on being invulnerable that he'd forgotten how to be human. Sophie was showing him a different kind of strength, one that came from connection rather than isolation. "Sophie," Marcus began, then stopped himself. The words he wanted to say felt too dangerous, too likely to shatter the fragile peace they'd built. He was her employer. She was Emma's nanny. Crossing that line could destroy everything good they'd created together. But as Sophie looked at him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through every wall he'd built, Marcus realized his empire had never felt more at risk. And for the first time in decades, he wasn't sure he wanted to protect it. The next morning brought an unexpected crisis that would test everything Marcus thought he knew about loyalty and sacrifice. His phone rang at dawn with news that Sterling Financial was facing a hostile takeover attempt. 3 rival firms had joined forces, sensing weakness they claimed to detect in his recent management decisions. "Marcus, we need you in the city immediately." His CFO's voice crackled through the speaker. "The board is convening an emergency session. They're questioning your judgment, saying you've been distracted, unfocused. Some are suggesting it might be time for new leadership." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Sterling Financial wasn't just his company. It was his identity, his legacy, everything he'd spent 30 years building from nothing. The thought of losing it should have sent him into immediate action, racing back to Manhattan to fight for his empire with every weapon in his considerable arsenal. Instead, he found himself hesitating, looking out the window toward the garden where Sophie and Emma were already awake, planting sunflower seeds in neat rows. Emma's laughter carried on the morning breeze, bright and unguarded, in a way that still amazed him. "Tell them I'll be there by noon," Marcus said finally, though something inside him rebelled against leaving this sanctuary he'd discovered. Sophie noticed his tension immediately when he appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in his armor of an expensive suit and gleaming cufflinks. Emma looked up from her cereal with concern. "Daddy, you look angry. Are you angry at us?" The innocence of her question nearly broke his heart. "No, sweetheart, never at you. Daddy just has some problems at work that need fixing." Sophie's eyes searched his face with that uncanny ability she had to read beyond his words. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. What could a nanny and a 10-year-old possibly do against corporate sharks circling for blood? But something about Sophie's genuine offer of support steadied him in a way that surprised him. "Just take care of Emma," he said softly. "That's the most important thing right now." The drive into Manhattan felt like traveling backward through time, leaving behind the peace he'd found at the estate and returning to the gladiatorial arena of high finance. By the time Marcus reached his office, reporters had already gathered outside the building, sensing blood in the water. The boardroom was a battlefield of tension and barely concealed ambition. Faces Marcus had trusted for years now looked at him with calculation rather than loyalty. The presentation his enemies had prepared was thorough and devastating, documenting every moment he'd spent away from the office. Every decision they claimed showed weakening judgment. "Marcus has lost his edge," declared Harrison Webb, a board member Marcus had personally recruited 5 years earlier. "He's been absent more in the past month than in the previous 5 years combined. Sterling Financial needs leadership that's fully committed, not distracted by personal matters." The accusations stung because they contained just enough truth to be dangerous. Marcus had been spending more time at the estate, had been less ruthless in recent negotiations, had found himself considering the human cost of decisions rather than focusing purely on profit margins. Marcus stood at the crossroads of everything he'd built and everything he'd discovered. His empire hung in the balance, but for the first time in decades, he knew what truly mattered. Sometimes the greatest risk isn't losing what you have, but failing to embrace what you've found. In the end, love became his most profitable investment. And Sophie showed him that the richest life isn't measured in dollars, but in moments that take your breath away.